public policy. So welcome, Emily Matter. I would like to introduce you. Emily is the program manager for the Northeast Regional Ctr of Excellence in Vector-borne diseases. She's the extension associate she's an extension associate in the Cornell Department of Entomology. And as we were just discussing, Emily has a master's in public health and a master's of public policy from the University of Utah. She finished in 2013. She's a public health researcher trained in quantitative and qualitative research methods with specialization in program management and evaluation, very important part. She's also expert in strategic planning, survey research methods. In addition to a role at NEVBD program management, she regularly contributes to the development and implementation of NEVBD community of practice and training objectives designed to bolster the public health infrastructure and workforce capacity surrounding vector-borne disease prevention and control. And welcome, Emily. Thank you so much for last minute. I know you just came back from a meeting, for being willing to share what's happening in Cornell and NEVBD with us. Take it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I'm really excited to talk with this department. Rutgers, as you guys will find out, has been a great partner of us here at Cornell. And so we're always happy to connect and share information and engage with students across the Northeast and especially in New Jersey. So I do want to let the group know that it is really windy here in Ithaca today, and I'm a little nervous about my bandwidth. So as I do the presentation, I'm going to turn off my video, but when we get to the questions section, I'll turn it back on. Okay. So that's why my video is going off, is just because we are having quite the windstorm today. Okay. So as Dina let you guys know, my name is Emily Mader, and I have been the program manager for the Northeast Regional Ctr for Excellence in Vector-borne Diseases since 2017. And today I'm going to, and then also here's my contact information if anybody would like to reach out after the presentation. But today I'm going to go over some of the programming that we've done through the Ctr of Excellence, providing basically a review of the work we did under the funding stream of the Ctr of Excellence, which termed about a year ago, and then give an introduction to the new orientation of our program, which is called a Teaching and Evaluation Center. So this is a new initiative from CDC working in the vector-borne disease space, which we are participating in. And so after I introduce the Teaching and Evaluation Center, we'll go over some of our new project priorities and then go into a bit of a deep dive on some of our academic training efforts that we're supporting currently. So how we started, we received funding from the CDC as one of the first 5 centers of excellence in vector-borne diseases. And this was a program that CDC built after the Zika outbreak in 2015, 2016, which I hope everybody remembers. It was a pretty big deal and kind of impacted a lot of our lives, but in a positive outcome of it was that we now have a more robust funding stream from Congress to support CDC efforts to combat vector-borne disease threats in the United States. And one of those flagship programs was the Ctr of Excellence program. Our group at Cornell worked with Columbia University, Rutgers, Fordham, the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, and the New York State Department of Health to provide support to stakeholders across the 13 states and District of Columbia that are in the map there on your screen. All centers of excellence that were funded were tasked with working towards 3 foundational pillars. So these included applied research that addressed existing and emerging threats of tick and mosquito-borne disease. For us, we focused on the Northeast region. We also were tasked with providing innovative training to not only support the next generation of public health entomologists entering the workforce, but also supporting workforce development for people already in the field, making sure they had access to the training and professional development needs that would equip them to better serve their communities. And then the last kind of pillar that the Centers of Excellence focus on are supporting a community of practice. And what that means is connecting professionals across sectors that traditionally weren't talking with each other. So academic expertise, public health expertise, and then kind of boots on the ground, vector surveillance and control professionals, making sure that there's dialogue between all these different sectors that are contributing valuable efforts towards combating vector-borne disease threats. And so the image on your screen is kind of the framework that our Ctr of Excellence adopted. The elements in the blue are kind of focused on our community of practice. So a lot of our needs assessment, delivery of direct services. We did a lot of advocacy for stakeholders at both state and federal government to support the work of vector-borne disease prevention and control. And then the areas in yellow are our academic and kind of professional development services. And then in green are our applied research areas. And so I'll go into these a little bit further next. So as I mentioned, we were funded in 2016, and that funding lasted until 2022. And during that time, we were able to support a network of over 100 regional, national, and local public health and vector control organizations and government entities. So that's really our community of practice that it really did take about 5 years to build, just meeting people, building relationships, and building trust to share information and resources across different sectors that, as I mentioned, traditionally didn't talk with each other. In terms of our training, we supported over 45 undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral researchers across the 5 institutions that I mentioned at the start of this section. And then we also provided direct training to about 1,600 professionals. These included live events like workshops. We had a boot camp that was hands-on, but we also did things virtually because, as you all know, COVID necessitated that we stop being in person for a lot of our programming. So we developed a lot of webinars and virtual training programs as well. And then lastly, we supported about 115 applied research projects across the 5 institutions that we funded. And these projects supported work in all of the northeastern states that we cover and resulted in over 90 peer-reviewed publications. So I want to dive in a little bit to some of the applied research portfolio to give you guys a bit of a flavor of the areas that we were working and supporting. We supported about, we call them research clusters, but these are kind of 6 applied research target areas that we supported through the Center of Excellence. They focused on improving surveillance for vectors, predicting the risk of the expansion of vectors and the pathogens that they are associated with, understanding the interactions biologically between vectors and pathogens, so things like vector competence, characterizing genetic diversity and spillover events. We also look at the biology, behavior, and survival of different vectors that might be emerging in our Northeast communities, particularly looking at tick survival during the winter, as that's a major concern, as I'm sure you guys are aware in New Jersey. But, you know, going north, are the vectors going to be expanding as temperatures warm during the winter months? We also supported a lot of work on resistance and control, so investigating vector control approaches, what works best, and then also monitoring mosquito populations for resistance to pesticides. And then lastly, our team at Rutgers supported a really aggressive applied research agenda looking at the Asian longhorn tick, which kind of entered our lives in 2017. And they did a lot of work on surveillance, understanding the biology and ecology of this tick, and also assessing the efficacy of some of our control approaches to controlling this tick in the environment. And so just a brief snapshot of some of the work we did. So for example, this is looking at field efficacy for mosquito control. We worked with partners in Massachusetts where in 2019, there was a pretty large outbreak of Eastern equine encephalitis virus, which is a mosquito-borne virus that can be quite serious when humans are infected. And there was an outbreak in 2019, which prompted a lot of efforts to better understand whether or not we can control populations of the mosquito that amplify this virus before an outbreak occurs. And so we worked with partners in Massachusetts, Vector Control, to evaluate aerial applications of the control product methoprene. And we saw that, unfortunately, that particular approach to control is not effective at reducing the mosquito populations responsible for triple E virus amplification, and just highlights that there's a lot more work to do in that space. Looking at some of our surveillance work, we focused a lot on tracking the emergence of new pathogens. And so for those who might not be familiar, Heartland virus is a arbovirus spread through the bite of the Lone Star tick. And, you know, it's traditionally been identified in locations further south, you know, Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic region in the United States, where this tick is predominant, but this tick is also spreading north. And so our colleagues at the New York State Department of Health identified a local transmission of Heartland virus associated with this tick in Suffolk County, New York, which is where Long Island is located. And then lastly, I of course want to highlight some of the work at Rutgers with the Asian longhorn tick. So this work was supported through our center, and it was looking at control approaches to this tick, targeting the life stages of the tick. So if you apply control during the larval stage, what does this mean for the nymphal stage control? And they found that acaricides, which are pesticides targeting arthropods like ticks and mites and things like that. If you apply acaricides, you can provide 100% control for up to 7 weeks, and that applying these later in the summer at the end of the adult host-seeking activity period can control larval populations. And so that gave some really good insight into strategic application of acaricides to the environment to protect us from tick bites. Next, I'm going to go over some of our flagship programs from the Center of Excellence that I wanted to call out because they're ones that we are happily continuing in our new funding cycle. And I wanted to give some background on how they got built. So the first one of these is our pesticide resistance monitoring program. So this program, we built it in 2019, and we've been conducting it every year since. And it is basically aiming to provide resources and information around pesticide resistance testing for mosquito control operators across the Northeast region. An assessment done through support of CDC and the National Association of City and County Health Officials, which is also called NACCHO for the quick acronym. They found out that most mosquito control agencies across the United States really had a capacity gap in terms of pesticide resistance monitoring. And the reason this is important is that there are not many pesticides that we are able to use for public health events. So if there's an outbreak of a mosquito-borne virus, we really don't have that many active ingredients that we're allowed to apply to the environment to knock down mosquito populations. And so if mosquitoes are building resistance to these active ingredients, that really puts us in a bind because it means that our limited toolbox is shrinking. And so it's important to identify if resistance is emerging so that we can build strategies to have, alternative approaches should an emergency arise. So that was why we built this program. And we, the 5 kind of components of it are that we do annual needs assessments to measure the capacity gaps in our region. We offer a submission system where people can collect mosquitoes from their local communities, send them to us at Cornell, and we'll do the assays to see if they are resistant to any of the active ingredients we test for. We also build kits and ship them out to communities who want to do that activity in-house. We provide the materials and supplies for free. And we also do education and some of those control assessments with community partners to see are our approaches working or not. And so since we built this in 2019, we have tested over 87,000 specimens. Over half of those are tested to resistance to adulticides, and then 42% for larvicides. 39 agencies have submitted mosquitoes to us, and these are from 192 sites across 11 states. So we've done a pretty decent job on getting a geographic spread of different mosquito populations and their resistance status. Unfortunately, we are detecting an increasing trend of moderate to high resistance to active ingredients, particularly pyrethroids, which on this map on your screen, the little wet red wedges are indicating high resistance. And so you can kind of see that we have high resistance in the Maryland, Virginia area, and also growing along the eastern seaboard all the way up into Massachusetts. And so this is something that we're consistently working with our partners to better understand the implications of this for applied field, control situations of, if we have resistance mosquitoes, what does that mean for emergency response? And it's something that we're continuing to support in future years as well. Another one of our flagship programs is focused on training. So it's called the Vector Biology Bootcamp. And I apologize, it says virtual up here. We did do this virtually, but we're also now going back to in-person since the COVID pandemic restrictions have eased. But we did do this virtually during COVID, and we also offer in-person hosting of this. But essentially, this is a hands-on 3 to 4 day program where professionals come to us to learn about methodologies for vector surveillance and control. So this includes how to collect ticks and mosquitoes from the environment, how to identify them, understanding their biology and behavior so you can set up a surveillance program strategically. And then also some other skills such as, how do I process my data? How do I share it with my stakeholders? How do I communicate with the public? And we evaluate all of our training programs to know better, are we having an impact on workforce capacity? And then are there other ways that we can improve our programming? And so for this vector biology bootcamp, we did pre-post knowledge assessments across all of our program cohorts. And we're happy to report that we do show statistically significant increases in knowledge in these kind of key areas for vector surveillance and control, including understanding what the major regional vectors and diseases are, understanding taxonomy and identification, basically these really kind of fundamental skills for vector surveillance and control. And the last one I'm going to highlight before moving into our new other section is our Masters of Science in Entomology program. So this is a program that we built from scratch, more or less, in the Cornell Entomology Department. It is a 2-year master's program that we fund fully through the NEDBD funding stream. And it is a hybrid between a public health degree and an entomology degree. And our goal for this is that we are providing training for people who want to directly enter the workforce in the skills they need to be agile public health entomologists. As I mentioned, this is a kind of a partnership program between our group here in the entomology department, but then also our partners in the Cornell Masters of Public Health program. And a happy outcome of this is that our Cornell MPH program, the students that are on their infectious disease track are actually also required to take some of the courses that we developed in the entomology department around vector-borne diseases, which is a nice partnership because that means that people getting a degree in public health have exposure to vector-borne diseases and have a little bit more familiarity with this area of public health that they historically maybe wouldn't have had access to. Our students in this program are required to do a field thesis research project to earn their degree. And a goal of this program is that it was a place where we could embed our students with regional partners who needed extra hands and support to evaluate issues relevant to their communities. And so we sent our students out into the field each year and embedded them in the locations that you see on your screen to conduct their field research on an issue of mutual interest and benefit to both themselves for their degree, but then also our field partners and the issues that were affecting their communities. And then lastly, I just always like to highlight our collaborative partnerships. So since 2017, when we kind of really ramped up as a center, we have built a lot of partnerships that support not only our training programs, but a lot of our applied research programs. And I always like to acknowledge those partnerships because none of us work in a vacuum in public health and vector control and surveillance. And so I always like to give credit where credit's due. So with that, I will now move on to our new funding stream. So as I mentioned, our Center of Excellence termed in 2022. And then this past summer in July 2023, we received funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a teaching and evaluation center. So the Teaching and Evaluation Center's targeted objectives are extremely similar to the Center of Excellence targeted objectives. We're looking at training, we're looking at partnerships, but there's one major difference in that the Centers of Excellence do applied research, whereas the Teaching and Evaluation Centers do evaluation. So what does that mean? It basically means that we are looking at strategies, products, materials that are currently available and being used by vector surveillance and control professionals. And we evaluate them in terms of, are they being effective? Is there a way that we can make this better? Can we improve our current tools and resources rather than doing research on new or novel approaches? And so that's the primary difference between the Centers of Excellence and the Teaching and Evaluation Centers. So under our tech, and so Teaching and Evaluation Center, the shorthand for that is tech. So if you hear me saying that, that's what I mean. So our tech is led by the institutions and individuals listed on your screen. Cornell University remains the prime awardee, and then we work with our partners across the region to implement our training and evaluation objectives. We also have formed an advisory board, and these advisory board members are non-funded external partners located in public health, private industry, and vector surveillance and control at multiple jurisdiction levels. And the goal for engaging them is just to provide expertise relevant to our program objectives and have that feedback from outside stakeholders that we can use to optimize how we're delivering our program. Our program has 5 major aims that are listed here on your screen, and I'll go into those in a little bit more depth now. The first one is that we are going to be doing needs assessments. This is a requirement of all tech programs that got funded by the CDC. And they have requested that we do needs assessments, particularly focused on training. So trying to understand what the training gaps are for the workforce. So we have devised 3 different arms of our needs assessments. The first one is looking at academic pipeline issues. And so understanding what the context is, what the kind of environment is for integrating vector biology and vector-borne disease content into existing programs, either MPH programs, community college programs, state-based universities. So this is a needs assessment that actually is requiring collaboration with CDC as well as our partners across the nation. And so that's one area that we're working on actively. The other area is professional development. So looking both at public health epidemiology as well as vector surveillance and control, and understanding what people in those positions need in terms of their professional development to feel that they're better suited to address emerging vector-borne disease threats impacting their communities. And then lastly, we have a dedicated arm looking specifically at clinical engagement. So we are looking at frontline medical providers. So those are individuals who work in primary care, pediatrics, as well as emergency and urgent care, specifically looking at tick-borne disease diagnosis and management. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new in, identifying that diagnosing and treating tick-borne diseases such as Lyme disease, babesiosis, anaplasmosis. We have a lot of room for improvement there. And so our goal with this is to understand better how to connect with these hard-to-reach clinical providers and provide them with the resources that they need in those clinical encounters to be better prepared for diagnosis and management. And we're doing that in tandem with our partners at CDC. The next arm of our work is looking at vector control evaluations. So as I mentioned, this is not research. This is evaluating existing tools and resources that we can optimize and improve their delivery. And the first of these is looking at the recently licensed rodent-targeted Lyme vaccine called Lyme Shield. This is produced by US Biologic. We are working with partners in Connecticut and New York State to implement basically following the label. So all products have to go through USDA and/or FDA approval, following labels of how you use them. And so, because this is an evaluation project, we are following the label perfectly, and we're going to be seeing, following the instructions of the manufacturer, what is the impact of using these Lyme Shield devices on human risk of Lyme disease in the residential setting. And so we're going to be doing this in Connecticut and New York State, but we're also partnering with our colleagues in Pennsylvania and CDC to follow the same protocols and look at the efficacy of these devices in different ecological settings. The next area of vector control evaluation is looking at host-targeted tick control. So this is predominantly looking at deer four-poster programs. There is an existing program in Long Island operated by the New York State Parks Program. And so we are working with that program to optimize how this four-poster program is working. So are there ways that we can improve its delivery so that tick populations for both the Lone Star tick as well as the black-legged tick that impact communities on Long Island, that through the four-poster program, we're having an impact on the risk associated with those tick populations. We're also looking at how communities feel about different tick control approaches. So just because an approach to tick control might work in terms of improving risk metrics, it doesn't mean that the public is going to want to use it. We have noticed this, particularly looking around deer-targeted approaches. So some programs, for example, might bring in people to help reduce the deer herd. So if you have fewer deer, you might have fewer ticks, and there's been a lot of public pushback on that. And so our goal is to just understand, of the suite of approaches that we can use targeting ticks, which ones are accepted by the public and which ones have more problems or questions from the public, because that's a really important component of actually implementing any sort of control strategy. So we're going to be communicating with populations across the Northeast region on that topic as well. And then lastly, I put a star next to this because you guys have seen it before. We are continuing our pesticide resistance monitoring program. So we're going to continue to do our regional submission program, continue to provide technical assistance and training, but then we're also going to be building in these new control failure assessments. So again, that's linking what we are observing in the laboratory to what our partners in the field are observing when they try to implement control activities to reduce mosquito populations. And the final arm of our kind of evaluations are looking at public communication. So CDC specifically asked us to look at communication around the upcoming Lyme disease vaccine. So for those who might not be aware, there are currently ongoing clinical trials, phase 3 for a Lyme disease vaccine. And if those continue in their current trajectory, we could have a vaccine available as soon as 2026. And the CDC is well aware of current sentiments around vaccines, as well as the failure of the last vaccine that we had on the market to really be accepted and utilized by the public. That vaccine was pulled off the market by the manufacturer. And so they're wanting to understand a little bit more about the current context, what people might be thinking about a Lyme disease vaccine, understanding public sentiment so that they can provide good and responsive information for people who are curious about this vaccine, and promote its uptake based on the efficacy that we learn from the clinical trials. So that's one arm of our communication evaluations. And the other substantially larger arm is looking at knowledge, attitudes, and practices. So these are survey tools that entomologists routinely use to understand how their communities are thinking about ticks and mosquitoes, what prevention information they have access to and use. And, you know, there's a strong link between understanding these aspects of community perceptions and developing a communication intervention campaign. So we are working in this space to optimize how these survey tools are developed so that they're responsive to the different diverse communities we have in the Northeast region. And then also make sure that we're actually reaching those communities. There's a lot of communities in the Northeast that historically haven't been engaged in, say, survey tool development or communication program implementation that are actually negatively impacted by tick and mosquito-borne disease. And so we're working with our partners at CDC to identify those communities in more detail and build relationships so that we can start delivering programming to them. Another major arm of our teaching and evaluation center, because it's in the name, is teaching. So we are supporting a large effort of our work on professional development. This is, again, you're seeing a star here because I mentioned already, but we're continuing the vector biology boot camp. So this, again, is a hands-on program where we bring professionals in to do hands-on kind of boot camp style, high intensity 4-day program where they get the fundamentals of vector surveillance and control. This program is offered 100% for free. So in the past, we usually couldn't afford to cover people's travel, but we recognize that as a major barrier to low resource programs. So we're actually now able with this new funding stream to provide this 100% for free. And so our offering of the first one in this next kind of phase of our program is happening this May in Scarborough, Maine. And in future years, we're kind of going to be rotating this like kind of a roadshow. We're taking this program all across the Northeast region to make sure we can get to different states where travel is less accessible. And so that's one of our major pushes for professional training. But we're also going to be continuing to do topical workshops, online seminars, and courses. And then we're developing a specific focus for Indigenous nations in our region. So the groups that we have built relationships with to date do have natural resource programs in their nations. And that workforce is a high priority for us to deliver training to, because historically there has not been as much infrastructure there to support the training of their staff. And so we have a specific arm of our professional development focused on Indigenous nations. Looking at academic training, we are supporting a lot of academic training objectives. So I put a star next to our MS entomology program. So I'm happy to report that we are going to continue to support this master's degree program at Cornell University. We have funding to provide support for 4 additional graduates of this program who are going to receive cross-training in public health and vector biology. And I'll pause there because this is one of the ones I'm going to do a deep dive in a couple moments. But we are also supporting internship programs that are specifically focused on engaging undergraduate and community college students over a summer internship period but also supporting engagement with Masters of Public Health students. So all NPH programs require their students to complete what historically has been called a practicum, but nowadays is called an applied practice experience. And so we are working with our NPH programs at our funded institutions. So that's Cornell, Columbia, University of Maryland, and the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station to engage Masters of Public Health students in projects that focus on vector-borne diseases as they complete this applied practice experience. While we don't have a large cohort of graduate students in this iteration of our grant, we do still have graduate students at the PhD and postdoctoral levels. And we are going to be supporting cross-institution seminar series as well as shadowing experiences so that these more advanced trainees are going to be able to gain access to tools and skills that might not be present at their home institution, but are present across our network. So we're calling it the graduate pipeline, but that's one arm of our academic training. And then the final arm is mostly focused in Connecticut right now, but hopefully is something that we can bring to other university partners across the Northeast region. But essentially, our partners in Connecticut are working with state colleges and universities to integrate vector biology into their current curricula. So this could take the form of minors and concentrations, depending on your academic level. But the goal is that we're going to be introducing vector biology in a more rigorous fashion into the existing programs across the state. And I did want to mention that because the CDC continues to support a wide variety of partners working in the space of vector-borne diseases, this is a growing community year after year. I'm happy to share that Congress has consistently provided robust funding to CDC to continue these efforts since the Zika virus outbreak kind of initiated that process. It's conversations we have with our elected officials every single year. And so far, it's been really worthwhile because the CDC has grown their portfolio of programs that they're able to support. So we have the tech programs, we have the Center of Excellence programs, but CDC also delivers a large amount of funding to our state public health programs to ensure that they are able to conduct this important work from a public agency perspective. But then there's also other programs like the American Mosquito Control Association, the National Association of City and County Health Officials, these other kind of nonprofit entities that also receive contracts and funding from CDC to work in the space of vector-borne diseases. And we're now in this unique situation where there's a lot of us working on the same space, and there's a need for us to collaborate and communicate more. And so that's something that we're building into our operations and our programs moving forward with the assistance of CDC Division of Vector-borne Diseases. And the areas where our group is finding the most engagement with our partners are these knowledge, attitudes, and practices surveys, the conducting of our needs assessments, our training programs, and then our engagement with our clinical workforce. And so these are projects that while we are doing our own work here in the Center of Excellence, they are ones that require kind of cross-institution national collaboration through these different arms of CDC funding. All right, fun part. Let's do a deep dive into some of our academic training programs that we're currently supporting. So as I mentioned, this slide is a repeat. Our Masters of Science in Entomology program is continuing. So as I mentioned, this is a 2-year fully funded program. We embed our students with field partners for their summer research. And then all of our students are required to have a publication quality thesis at the end of their 2-year period. What I didn't go over earlier is that we have designed this program to cover these kind of 5 essential core competency areas. This is something that we worked with our partners to kind of solidify and identify over our previous funding period as core competencies that any public health entomologist should have a strong foundation in order to be responsive and agile should new public health threats be emerging. And so we measure the development of these competencies for each of our students that goes through the program. They do a self-assessment at the start of each semester. So there's 4 semesters that they go through. They do a self-assessment kind of measuring how they feel. Are they competent? Are they not? Do they have room to grow across all of these areas? And then we use that feedback to provide them with responsive opportunities. So if they're feeling really weak in one area, we can provide them with some one-on-one coaching or build it into some of our our coursework moving forward. And then we also gain feedback from the students on the courses that they take with us so that we know if we need to improve the courses and how they're delivered. And then the students also take a final competency exam. And the long and the short of this is that, CDC is funding us to provide this responsive training and help support the workforce and the infrastructure around vector-borne diseases. And we need to prove that we are doing that. And so these evaluations are kind of critical to any sort of programming that you receive through, say, CDC or other similar federal institutions. And so I always like to highlight that, these are things that don't really get a lot of attention. They happen behind the scenes. But if you are ever in a position where you're going to be building a program, thinking about how you evaluate it is really helpful to show the impact that your program is having moving forward. So as I mentioned, our Masters of Science program, the students have to do a field thesis or field research thesis project. And so this timeline up here is just showing you all of the work that our students have to go through over this 2-year program. It's a pretty intense program, but I really like to highlight that, these are, if you are interested in a master's program similar to an MPH or something like this, always giving full transparency to the level of work required. It is just 2 years, so it's a lot to do in just 2 years. But you can kind of see the opportunities that our students are exposed to, the level of professional development that they receive across this 2-year period. It's pretty intense, but so far all of our students have thrived, and I'm happy to say that we have a 100% placement rate of our 10 graduates to date. They have all entered the field immediately upon graduation. Some now work for CDC, some now work for state public health programs, and some are working in kind of more academic research centers focused on vector-borne disease. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to continue this program. We are accepting 2 cohorts of students. So we just accepted 2 students that are going to be starting this fall. But if any of you guys are graduating soon and are interested in this program, we have space for 1 more cohort that will be starting in 2025. And so if you have any questions about this program, if it's of interest to you, I encourage you to reach out, and we're happy to have those conversations. And I wanted to do, lastly, the second deep dive into our summer internship program. So the context for this program is that, we had a lot of successes in placing our master's students with field partners to do their summer research. It was a huge value add to those partners who were particularly scarce on resources. So maybe they didn't have personnel, maybe they didn't have funding to do the work that they wanted to do. And our program was able to supplement that by having a student go work with them. So we wanted to build on that success and also engage students that were not in a master's program, but were, undergraduate students, so that they could be introduced to vector-borne diseases, gain skills, and work with experts currently in the field. And we designed this internship program with that goal in mind. So this is a 10-week paid internship. The baseline is basically a $7,000 internship stipend, but we do adjust this for cost of living. So if you're in, say, New York City, where it's extremely expensive to live, we do take that into account. And it is designed for undergraduate students at either community colleges or universities in the Northeast region. As I mentioned, our students will work directly with public agency partners. And so you can see that the internship locations we currently have on offer for this summer are located in that little box on the right-hand side of the screen. We're happy to have partners across the Northeast and Eastern Seaboard this year. And I did want to highlight that 2 of them are in New Jersey. So Flemington, we're working with the Hunterdon County Mosquito Control Project. And then also in Trenton, we're working with the state-based Mosquito Control Commission. So we are currently accepting applications. If you don't know what your summer looks like yet and this sounds interesting, there's a QR code on there where you can learn more about these opportunities. And I definitely encourage those with interest to do so. As I mentioned, the eligibility for this are current undergraduate students at either community colleges or universities, or recent graduates, so having graduated in the past year, and 18 years old or older. I did want to mention that this is a really great way to explore career options in this field. If it's something of interest to you, you're going to be working with people where this is their job all year long, and you're going to get to see what they do every day and gain some skills in working with insects, working with data, learning some field and lab skills. And so if that's of interest to you, I encourage you to reach out and learn a little bit more. And here's some information up here. I'll leave this on the screen just in case there's anyone who wants to look at the QR code. As I mentioned, we are currently accepting applications. They do close on March 1st. And with that, I'll just leave you with some other ways to connect with our program. We do have a website. We have a newsletter that we send out every Friday that gives just some relevant news for vector-borne diseases, either recent publications or news media highlights, also jobs and training opportunities. And then we also do have a presence on Twitter or X or, that platform that we do push things out through there as well. And with that, I'm happy to kind of pause and discuss if there's questions from the group.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you very much. Anne, do you want to, I don't know if Anne can hear me.
I'm here.
Okay, so you want to lead the next sort of the questions?
Sure. I mean, we have about 15 minutes with the speaker for our regular seminar questions. And then, I'd ask the students in the class to stick around. It will be a short class. We only have about half an hour today. So
Emily can only stay until 12:30.
Right. So I know we have we have just great talks and good programs in the chat. So I'll keep monitoring that for questions. But if anybody has questions for Emily, raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or just go ahead. Cheng Lu, go ahead.
I wonder how much is the funding and how you decide where you spend the money across different states. For instance, like New Jersey, I just wonder, you listed several, activities. Also, like, for example, the Master of Entomology, Master of Science in Entomology, and you wanted to support for, like, say, 2 or 3 years. But then after that, how the program would sustain?
Yeah, so the amount of money that we dedicate to the master's program is based on the Cornell graduate school. So we offer them the stipends, health insurance, and tuition coverage following the guidance of the Cornell graduate school. So that's kind of a variable number year to year, but that dictates how much money is dedicated to that particular training program. In terms of how we allot the funding that we receive from CDC, so the award that we get for the Training and Evaluation Center is $1.75 million per year across 5 years, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually not. So you have to be pretty strategic in how we divide the dollar amounts. And so we have the programs we support centrally at Cornell, but we also have programs that are subcontractors at the different university and public agency partners. They also need to have support through that funding stream. And so, there's not an easy or short answer to how we make priority decisions on how that money is distributed, other than it's always based on achieving the goals that we outline in our work plan that we developed with CDC when we received the funding. And so if one of the partners needs a certain dollar amount to get the work done, then obviously we would prioritize that in our decision making. And then, year to year, you do have different challenges and different constraints, different needs in the community. And so every year we assess the budget and realign where those new issues might arise or new priorities might arise.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Since I'm the only one with my hand up, and please raise your hand if you're interested in asking a question, and then don't forget to lower your hand. Emily, it's great. I mean, I was familiar with the previous program, and basically you're following up on all the training, and so and specifically you are getting a really great overview of sort of the because you also, as you mentioned, there are centers of excellence across the entire country. So this is really a global U.S. but global overview. And teaching a course in careers in entomology, and I really would like you mentioned all 10 masters that the students that came through the masters have found employment. How is the employment view? You're getting the 10,000 feet you. So could you share?
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I feel like that's something that we are always talking about, right? Because it's like you don't want to train people in a skill set where they can't go get a job afterward, you know? And so we were definitely worried about that when we were building the master's program, because the historical context of public health entomology is that CDC used to have a really decent amount at the start of the 20th century. And then by the time we got to Zika, they had like 9 people with the skill set that they needed. And so there was a huge gap. That's not just because there are less people getting trained, but also reflecting that there's just less economic job opportunities for people in this field. And so, yeah, we were definitely concerned that there weren't going to be jobs for our graduates. But we were super pleasantly surprised. There are a growing number of states that are employing what we call a public health entomologist. Every state has a public health veterinarian, for example. Not every state has a public health entomologist, but this is an area where CDC and so it's CST. I don't remember that. Basically, it's the epidemiology kind of stakeholder group across the United States. They're pushing pretty hard to make it a kind of universal. There is a state public health entomologist in each of our states. But, you know, we were surprised about the number of opportunities available, not just in academia, but actually in the public sector. So working for federal agencies, working for state agencies, working for local agencies. We actually found that state and local had a lot more to offer than we thought they would. And I think it's just reflective of the attention that vector-borne diseases are getting in the issues that they're causing for communities, that there's definitely a role for people with that skill set, and it's growing. And so we are optimistic that there are going to continue to be jobs, especially for people who are bachelor's and master's level trained. I think if you're PhD level trained, or maybe have even gone and done postdocs, your outlook looks different. And I think that's largely the nature of taking that career path, that, you know, you might have limited options in terms of academic placements. You might be looking more at industry jobs rather than public sector jobs. But I think in terms of people who are at the bachelor and master's level, the economic outlook in terms of job placement is actually pretty good these days. We're actually working with a student right now to look through all of our old newsletters over the past 6 years, and just getting a list of the different job opportunities that we highlighted in those listservs, and kind of categorizing like which sectors have the most opportunities. Is it at the state and local level, or is it federal? And so I'm hopeful in like the next couple of months, I can actually give you a much better answer once we kind of look through that.
Cool. I mean, I've been basically giving, every time I get a position, I'm passing it on to the students, and it's not just for med vet, but actually for any entomology job. And I think that a lot of the students really don't get a good feedback on what can we do with a degree, and what should we go for the PhD? Should we go for the master's? Should we go directly with some courses in entomology with a bachelor's? What can you get? And actually, there's much more, like yourself. I mean, and this is a very anecdotal, but my experience has also been that there's way more than people tend to think. You know, I know one of our students, her father was horrified when she first mentioned going into an entomology position, and now is, you know, she got a job, and things are really looking much better than potentially going to other kinds of positions. And now when you mention about PhD is interesting, because actually a lot of the superintendents or at least a significant number of superintendents are PhD levels at mosquito control programs. So it's not just academia that you would need a PhD, but yes, I can totally see that the higher the number of degrees, the more rarefied the number of available positions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I tend to ask too many questions. I'm going to let other students potentially interested in the general question. There's something in the chat. Here we go. Michael, can you ask out loud, Michael? Or do you want us to read it for you? If you don't have access to a microphone, just say, read it for me.
Can you hear me?
There you go. You can hear you.
Thank you so much for your talk that really gave such a comprehensive overview of all like the really cool things you have going on. And I was specifically wondering about your the center's like outreach education program, and how like what strategies you take to balance like getting the public interested and invested while not like freaking anyone out at the same time?
That's a
Thank you.
fantastic question. Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on that balancing act that public health generally has to do. Like, we're warning people about things that can impact their health, and you want them to feel empowered, not scared, right? And so historically, we haven't done a lot in this space during our Center of Excellence period because it kind of wasn't our mandate necessarily to do a lot of public engagement outside of things that were currently ongoing. But now that we're a teaching and evaluation center, this is a huge component of our programming. And I'm really excited about it because we have partners now who have expertise in public health communication. And so leaning on those relationships, we're developing approaches where you're using theories of behavior change, you're using best practices for strategic communication that take into account these issues around, are you going to scare somebody into inaction? Or are you going to motivate them to do something to protect themselves? And what are the levers that push and pull somebody into those different directions? And so it's really nice to have that expertise on our team guiding our approaches to how we're doing it. So in short, and instead of going deep into those public health theories, because I know we don't probably have the time or maybe the interest today, we're really grounding ourselves in best practices that are established in the public health communication field on how we're engaging with communities. We're trying to, it's called audience analysis. So who are the people we're talking to? What is their current level of awareness? And where are those areas that we can connect with them that resonate the most? So for example, some people, they might not find themselves particularly at risk, but they're really worried about their dog. And so, is that the best play? Is that the best way to get their attention and say, hey, you should really protect your dog. Here's a flea collar. They can get a Lyme vaccine. Also, you should care about yourself. Finding those strategic ways to engage with communities where it's not trying to save the world with an infographic. It's not trying to scare somebody into taking action, but really finding those motivational aspects that grab people's attention and kind of resonate with things they already care about. So that's a short answer to that question.
I love that. I love that the interdisciplinary approach to that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So since nobody's asking questions, and I can always come up with, because we could talk forever about this, and Lyme vaccine. How much do you think that the introduction of the Lyme vaccine is going to basically take the oomph on funding and research on other, because we all know, or those of us working on MedVet know, that there's plenty of other tick-borne pathogens, and just one vaccine is not going to go to do it all. What are strategies?
Well, so for quick context, the way that the federal congressional budgets appropriate money to CDC for vector-borne diseases is that there's one line that says vector-borne diseases, and then there's another line that says specifically Lyme disease. And so CDC can only use the money in that line item to talk about Lyme or the tick that vectors Lyme. And so historically, that has driven a lot of their activity. So I just did a literature review looking at where has tick control research focused in the past. And it's almost exclusively in the Northeast on the Lyme disease vector. And it's because of that's how Congress has structured the funding. So within that context, we know that there's going to be a chunk of money that CDC is going to be dedicating to Lyme disease because they have to. But then we have a larger chunk of money that they don't have to do that with, and they can be more agile and responsive. And we are seeing that in how they're apportioning the funds through the Centers of Excellence and the tech groups, and then their other they call them extramural programs, which are basically places they send the money out to other groups to do the work. We're seeing a really huge investment in the Ohio Valley, in the Southeast, and in the Mountain West, where other tick vectors are being, they're huge issues. And actually, they just released their national public health strategy last week, which is the kind of federal high level, this is how we are moving forward to address vector-borne disease threats. And one of their top 4 program kind of target outcomes was to reduce Rocky Mountain spotted fever transmission in the indigenous nations of the Southwest, because it has been a huge problem for those communities. And so they're trying to eliminate the transmission cycle altogether. So I think that just highlights that CDC is well aware that there's other priorities, And I think they're just going to have to try to make it work with the way Congress appropriates funding.
Okay. Devin said that he had a question. Devin, you got it.
Yes. So with the range expansion of dengue, how is your department preparing for it in conjunction with the fact that there's antibody cross-reactivity with SARS-CoV-2, so there's a higher chance of more severe dengue in SARS survivors?
Well, so I will say that our group doesn't really do a lot of work in that space anymore. Previously, under our Center of Excellence funding, our colleagues at the Connecticut Ag Station and New York State Department of Health did a lot of vector competence assessments, seeing like if our local mosquito vectors were going to be competent contributors to that transmission cycle of dengue virus, chikungunya, and Zika viruses, which, as you know, they're all closely related. In terms of the severity of dengue disease cases, a lot of that work is actually handled by our public health departments. And so our role in that space is not necessarily to be involved in contact tracing or working with the health departments to identify cases, but more to just, you know, again, in that space of training, making sure that the public health workforce is familiar with dengue virus to the extent that we can contribute to that training, understanding, like, reaching the communities that are at higher risk of becoming infected with dengue virus, not only travelers who are returning, but also people who live in California, Florida, Texas, places where Aedes aegypti is, you know, really getting a strong foothold. Doing a better job of letting the public know what their true risks are and what they can do to protect themselves and reduce that transmission risk. That's more the space that the Centers of Excellence and the tech programs operate in, because a lot of that kind of after a case has already occurred and somebody might be sick and how do you handle this, that's very much the public health department and clinical space. And so we are a little bit separated there.
All right, so you don't handle mosquito-borne diseases that are both like public health, major public health threats that also have different transmission routes. Like, I know.
No,
I know there are several tick-borne diseases that also have airborne transmission, like Q fever.
Right. So, for example, like tularemia is one that you can get from a tick bite, but also from running over a rabbit with your lawnmower. So, again, our role with that is because we are not the state public health program in charge of tracking those cases and doing the follow-up and providing clinical care. All we do in that space is support the public health infrastructure to the extent that we can to make sure that the people who do that work have what they need to get it done. So again, training, if they need access to more resources and we can provide them, we do that. But, you know, I think it's always important to recognize the work that our state public health epidemiologists do. They do a lot of really important work. And that's why the CDC funding for vector-borne diseases, the lion's share of it actually goes to our state public health programs, because that is their mandate to work on those issues in terms of understanding the different ways that you can get an arbovirus or become infected with a vector-borne pathogen. Our work in that space is, again, more focused on engaging the community so that our community residents understand their personal risk and what they can do to protect themselves.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. We're going to have to move to the class section because we're a little short on time. So everybody say thank you for Emily for this excellent seminar. And Emily plus the students in the class, please stay on. So we're just going to give a minute for everybody to kind of
okay.
I'm going to stop your screen sharing, Emily.
Oh, yep.
Oh, thank you.
And then I did see Mia, in case they are needing to hop off, I did want to quickly ask that, so to participate in the internship program, we actually don't want you to be from Cornell. We want you to be from somewhere else to engage in that summer internship program, which I forgot to mention, but so I'm glad somebody asked. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
for
really
that.
awesome. Sorry, I didn't want to unmute during the whole big thing. I am one of the students that's going to be staying here, so I guess.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So I'm super interested in it. I did have to leave a couple times because I had a lot of work happening on my area. So I had a couple door-to-door salespeople pop up. But I'm really interested in working in the
If the students could turn their videos on, that would,
all right,
I think,
I'm in my
engage.
I'm in my jammies, so I'm not looking the most visually. I don't even have my glasses on. But I'm really interested in working in the entomology and the research field specifically. And was the QR code for getting involved in the research the one that was like on the second or third to last slide, or was it the one on the very final slide?
I can actually, if it's okay, I can put that back up.
Sure. Or put it in the chat, whichever.
Yeah, so let me
I'm also gonna stop recording.